Okay, greetings, brothers and sisters. So I did a voiceover this morning. Today is July 4th, 2025. This is the 203rd edition of the Journey series. And so I did a voiceover, and some of the stuff, I thought it should go here. And I don't really want to say things more than once, but it's going to probably happen back to back of these voiceovers. Because I was talking about how some people are just born with a predisposition to search out a spiritual path. And the majority of those people will fail some way along the road, some way along the path, because they failed in the past, right? And I didn't talk about this part here that I'm going to say, but you'll hear the other part, and it's part of some other things, so I think it'll be interesting. But you have people who either feel like they're missing something, or there's just some idea that they need to find a spiritual path. They're spiritual seekers. There's people who are like treasure hunters, or want to go on a safari, which I was when I was a kid. I had these. Tell my wife that we had these, and there's a third floor to our house. We lived in this big house in West Hartford, Connecticut, and there was 2 third-floor rooms. My sisters moved up there because they were almost like an apartment, but you had to go up like 3 flights of stairs. I mean, it was crazy. Like as kids, I didn't give a shit, but whatever. And as my sisters moved out, one of the rooms became a storage room. And my parents, or in the closet of the house, there was these 2 huge plastic topographical, I don't know, topographical maps that were, it had mountains and stuff. Like it was like a big map of Africa and a big map of India. And when I was a kid, I wanted to be a naturalist, and there was a show, Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom, and I wanted to study animals. I learned as much about animals as I could. I was just into that kind of stuff. And I would learn about places where you could see, these types of things. I was like 7, 8 years old. I also find a closet full of my dad's Playboy magazines. There's a lot of shit going on up there. They had these 2 kind of, not walk-in closets because it was where the roof line was. And but they're big closets, and there's all this stuff in it. And I was just, once in a while I'd go up there, and I used to trace the maps and all these places with my finger, looking at different, cities and areas on these places where you'd go if you were going to a safari. And my dad promised me to take me on a safari, but my dad, when we went on a car trip, he had to take Dramamine. We went on deep sea fishing with my maternal grandfather, my mom's dad, and my dad would get seasick. So I didn't register that till I got older. My dad figured I'd grow out of it, which he was right. And I don't know how much I grew out of it, but I realized there's no way we're going on safari. He was just a bullshit promise. But anyways, I used to, think about exploring and doing those types of things. And, at some point in my life, I realized that I had, a past existence as a spiritual person, a person that was interested in doing this type of yogic, meditative stuff, because I've done it before. I've done it before in the past. People have things they've done before, and then it becomes something that they follow up. But the problem is that human beings usually get sidetracked and fail somewhere on the spiritual path. And that's quite evident in the Sahaj Marg system. You have a lot of people who are spiritual seekers, and there's just some part of them that there's some craving to be one with God and to be on a spiritual journey. And all of us take off and get enthusiastic about the system because it's the best system, the Sahaj Marg best system for this kind of thing. But at some point you're going to run into a roadblock, and because it's already failing once before always means that failure point is something that you have to ascend past in the next, existence. Like in your next existence, if you had a failure, everything will start off good, and then you'll fail if you commit suicide. I used to say this to people. I mean, I used to say this in videos, not to people, but some people listen to this and they said it changed their thinking about suicide. So if you commit suicide in one life, then you'll live your next life, and that'll be a part of it. Like that, your suicide in a previous life will be, you'll reach a point where you get depressed and things will go south, and suicide will be an option. Like it'll cross your mind. And if you do it again, then you come back. Now it's even more prevalent in your subscaric pattern, and you'll do it. It'll keep on happening until you break free from that cycle, and it'll be so powerful if you've done it 5, 6, 7 times. Like that's that'll be there's a there's a suicidal storyline, and it's set up for your life, and so it's. So if there's failure or whatever, there's success at first or failure later, or just any of these things that you have issues with, then if you had a gambling problem, drinking, these things, addictions, you'll have those things in the future. And, it's a reason for not doing things that cause you to get into a negative cycle. Because it starts off with anything fun, drug use, gambling, whatever it is, womanizing, whatever it might be. It starts off fun and pleasurable. It's the start, and then it destroys every particle of you, and you get dark and gross and just all of the bad things, and then you die with that problem, and you haven't conquered it yet. You haven't ascended past it, and that's already booked for your next life. That's already been penciled in. It's penned in. It's already. Your script has already been printed with that being a part of it for your next life, right? And so, it's really important for people to know when they are on the spiritual path that they, that's going to come. Like there's going to be there's just obstacles and things, natural obstacles on the spiritual path, choice points. Like it's a tough thing. It's the toughest thing. It's the hardest thing to stick with, because it just, there's all these temptations, there's all these issues, and there's all these, especially if you had fallen in the past existence. I should also put this on the Gratefulness meditation as kind of an essential understanding. And so it's not something to none of these things you should be obsessed with. Like thinking about, oh my God, when's this going to happen? Or, that's the wrong approach. But recognize, it's, these whispers of the brighter world prophecies and all these things that you see, and anything you hear from people that can see the future to some extent, see where we're headed. You don't want to focus on it so much that you create it happening, because we all have the divinity within us, right? And we all have a divine-like thought force that's akin to the original thought that created the universe. That's like a Sahaj Marg discovery, the Kashob. And so that created, this minor thought that, this thought power that we also possess. One of the great things that Charji said when he was giving a preceptor talk was, if you think it'll be difficult, it will be difficult. Because if you think something is difficult and you have this power to manifest things, so, how our beliefs and the way that we use our mind has to be, it isn't that you control your mind, you train your mind, right? And you train your mind to the positive. But, being aware that these things are possibly there waiting for you in the future, you just have to, be prepared. And, when something like this starts happening, you realize that this is a cleaning, this is a test. It's something that's pulling you off of your spiritual path, and that you have to do something about it. Or it'll, you have to, it's a challenge. It's a thing that you have to look at. When you go to a gathering in the Sahaj Marg system, which you won't do because the fucking, Heartfulness is a fucking joke and the gatherings suck. But when the gatherings used to be there, negative emotions would come out, and these things are being cleaned out. And you talk to a senior person, they'd be like, oh, you're just going through a cleaning. And it sounds very dismissive, because you feel like shit, like you just, physically and emotion. Like I've had some of the worst moments before these gatherings, during these gatherings, crawling out of my skin, restlessness, and just whatever. But, it sucks when someone says you're just going through a cleaning, but it's true. Like once the cleaning is over, you feel amazing. And it helps you reach another level. But while you're in it, you don't want to hear that shit. But if you know it's just a cleaning, you can sort of detach yourself. Like if I feel anger or negativity in my system, I can detach myself from it and not react, not, yell at somebody or, do something, I can detach myself from it and say, this too shall pass. I had a hard time remembering that was that biblical quote. But it's something you're just going through. And you can detach yourself from the illusion that these illusionary things that seem so important, but it's, they're really not. And so, the other piece to this is, I think I might talk a little bit in this next voiceover, is that those are the people who have craving for spirituality. And then there's all the people that don't. Like, and craving for spirituality could be, being a legitimate truther and truth seeker and having a curious mind and, wanting and, having thinking and wondering about God. I mean, this, it's a small number of people that have these tendencies. And those people are probably the only ones that can, embark on a spiritual path. Most other people are not interested. So, and those people who can embark on a spiritual path, many of them are going to have, they'll make some progress, and then they're going to have a spiritual fall. So, that's what's the plaguing humanity, because you need a material wing and a spiritual wing, and that's why the brilliant teachings of the Sahaj Marg system, you can't neglect either. But when people neglect something, it's almost always the spiritual wing. Like 90-some% of people neglect that. And, we can't get anywhere as long as that's the case, right? Because this only spirituality will save this world thing, right? I'm not ending the video here, but that's, But anyways, I'm getting a little bit sleepy. I want to go do some work. So, I want to include this in the beginning, the introduction to this journey series. I might talk about this more. But, I've seen it over and over again, that people who rose to high levels of the Sahaj Marg system, and then they fall. And there's all these stories, and I've told some of them and some of the people, things most of the people I didn't read, I read about but didn't know. But, then the stuff with Daji and all of his acolytes, right? And it's just, humanity has kind of a fucking really dismal record on spirituality and relationship with God. And it's just on a, on a social level, cultural level, and certainly individuals, like in terms of, and religions and all of it. And so, we're just really bad at it. I mean, compared to what we have, these capabilities, there's spiritual points. Like Babaji said, there's a spiritual point. And again, people would misuse this if they had access to it, where you can just travel anywhere you want, not astral travel, but physically travel, just with a mere thought. Like there's things like that, right? Charji was getting a sitting one time, and he was sitting there in a sea of like a certain color of blue, like a deep blue. And there was just this blue, light or whatever was around him. And he was just in this blissful state. And Babaji said, what did you feel during the meditation? And Charji said, there's this blue light. And, he explained what he saw. And Babaji said, yeah, that was eternity, right? You've got a, meditative experience of eternity. I've had some of these amazing experiences, like, probably, more than I could think of. And then some really maybe ones that were bigger than others. But all of them, that are things that are available, people are just scratching the surface. I think like at a physical level, people know about 10% of what you know about a human body. With all the stuff that doctors have, all the autopsies, all the, people just don't even know how things work. Like I said, I was going to do this thing on sleep, and they don't know what happens to that moment of sleep. Like science has no idea what happens when you go from being awake to being unconscious. Like exactly what happens physiologically and all of it. But we all do it every day, and they have no idea. There's lots of things like that. Science can't explain pretty much, most of everything. And then there's spirituality and religion that they barely scratch the surface of any of it, right? And so, at some point, it might be different, but people would have to go to a different level of consciousness, and there's going to have to be a genetic mutation according to the whispers of bright world messages, and people are going to have to shift into a higher state of being. Anyway, so let me wrap this one up here, but there's other voiceover coming, and then, those are the two that I did today, and then there'll be more following, more coming after that. Okay, still Friday, July 4th. I want to add something before I go to the voiceover I made this morning for this video that I put up today. The key to what I was talking about earlier, the key to not falling spiritually is not take ownership of any of your spiritual evolution. That it has really almost nothing to do with you. And it's not something that you own. It's not something you control. It's not something that you have leveled off in a sense that it can't be taken away. It might be impressive to other people, and you might show off some abilities you have, some insights, but you should always look at it like that divinity is descending down into you to amplify or bring out something or add something to you or use you as a conduit for something. And that, although you're experiencing it, it's not something that you can pat yourself on the back about or congratulate yourself or, but most importantly, that it isn't, it's all God's. It's God's, it's God's expression. It's divine expression through you. And that without God, you couldn't have achieved anything. And then, in my case, the Sahaj Marg spiritual system, that without the proper guidance and help and assistance, there's many people who have a capacity and even a work ethic and a commitment to their spiritual journey and connecting to the divinity within them. And without the proper system and without the blessing of God, it doesn't happen. Without the need, and that's the other thing, the need of the time, right? There's a desperate need at a time for a spiritual evolution to happen on planet Earth. And so, there are, it's talked about in the Sahaj Marg system, there's people who meditated from one yuga to the next. It's like 10,000 years, and whatever, 20,000 years, depending on the time, and they still didn't get liberation, right? So, like, this was something that was being passed out like Pez by Babaji for the Sahaj Marg people, who didn't appreciate that it was just a unique time in history, a time like where almost it's a Hail Mary for the human race to evolve spiritually. So it's, it's oftentimes things that you did in the past life to open up the possibility of where you're evolving today. It's also your assignment, what you were supposed to come down here to do. And so it's your destiny, and so these things are granted to you. But there needs to be a detachment and no sense of you ever thinking that you somehow did this and you are, you made it happen. No matter what, like even in any kind of, if you're famous and rich and the wealth comes and the success comes and, all these things, you should never get arrogant about it. Like, yeah, I did this and, I did it. It was all me. And, when you get that way, then you're fucked. In anything in life, like everything, all your blessings are just that, blessings, and should come from you come from it for a sense of wonderment and gratitude and appreciation and humility and all these things. And as long as you keep those things and you don't forget any of that stuff, especially for me, it's been easy because I was such an under-functioning person before I started doing Sahaj Marg system, and I see it every day how the system is helping me. And, whatever it might be. And, even to the extent like struggles with my YouTube channel now, it was divine intervention that made my YouTube channel pop with a couple of videos back, in 2014. It was, the YouTube channel was around for a long time, just sitting there with, just whatever, 1,000 views a month, 2,000, I don't know, 10,000, some cases, really not making much money or, anything that was substantial. It was more or less a hobby, and then it took off. And I made the video, so like there's some credit to me, but there was other things at play, right? That, there was something that happened that was beyond certainly wasn't my plan. I didn't think about it when I made the video, the Michelle Obama video and the follow-up video to that, and those videos that popped, and then I could see how to make those videos, given the algorithms, given what, the way that YouTube promoted things. But even with that, I would make videos, and some of them would pop and some of them wouldn't, and it wasn't because of the video itself. It was how YouTube promoted it, how other people received it, the title, some of these things, just all of the factors that were involved that were beyond my control. And even with that, you can make the best video and nobody sees it. And so, and even, with that, I understood that a lot of the content, all the content was enhanced by my spiritual practice. So like when you have that attitude, that it's not about you and whatever you accomplish and whatever you become, there's a lot of things that go into your success and also your failure. And not to get too down on yourself, or, that this is a part of a whole, there's a script here, there's a divine plan, there's all these things. And if you're willing to do the work and you are willing to participate and play a role and, work for God, for the betterment of humankind and the planet and, the divine will, then you'll be given, work. And if you get the work and you do that work good, you do well enough, or you're successful at the work, you get more work. And at some point, you're moving up to higher levels of consciousness and spirituality, but it's never something that you can, take pride in and pat yourself on the back. There's a lot more at play here. And as long as you remember that, then you won't fall, but nobody ever does, because people start worshiping you, or, whatever that might be. And that, that's almost always the downfall, the fame and the adoration that, that is unjustly given to you because you're just, being a conduit for the divinity within you. Okay, so I just want to add those two things. This is going to be, the first two audios will be a standalone video on the Apocalaughs Now channel, and then, the Gratefullness meditation channel, and then the rest of this, I'll add another audio for the Journey series. The one audio I did this morning earlier, and then several more audios after that probably. Anyways, that's it for this one. Actually, there's one more thing here. That's constant remembrance, the idea that it's God doing everything and it's not you. God's giving this talk, God, not me, this idea. Or God's sharing the experience with me, or we're doing it together. But this idea that God is in there performing everything and all you're doing. So this is a good practice on a lot of levels, a Sahaj Marg practice. And again, it alleviates the burden of failure and success, or whatever you might consider. You do the work and the results are God's, this kind of thing that can be very, helpful, just the right attitude, to where there's no sense of, patting yourself on the back, no sense of I did this, it was all me, this kind of thing. Anyways, just want to add that only spirituality will save this world. It's Paul Romano, definitely reporting from the Apocalaughs and the Ascension. Everyone have a blessed day and be grateful.